Okay. Well, thank you once again for joining us this afternoon for this conversation. I am delighted to be able to welcome today the Reverend Kerri Parker. She serves as the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Council of Churches, a position that she's held for about, is it 3 years now? Or 30? Just feels like 30, right? And when she came into this role, I'm sure she had no imagination that the role would grow and evolve in the ways that it has. Just as many of us and most of us, if not all of us, have had to learn new skills and engage in new behaviors, things that we could not have imagined just 12 months ago. But the Wisconsin Council of Churches has been recognized throughout the country, really, as one of the leading sources and guides for religious communities. We have a weekly meeting on Mondays for kind of judicatory leaders, bishops, and other folks across the state, where Kerri is able to kind of give us an update on what she's learning. She's in regular communication with public health leaders and governmental officials, et cetera. So it's a great kind of a clearinghouse for that kind of updated information. And she has led the effort of response with care and concern, but also wisdom, insight, and scientific information that's really good to gather together for those of us who are not scientists. So thank you, Kerri, for being with us today. Again, she's going to give a brief summary of the recommendations, and then we will open it up for questions and answers. And if you'd be so kind just to make sure you keep yourself muted until we open things up for Q&A, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. It is good to be with you all here on screen. I'm going to give a hyper-condensed version of the recommendations that we have. If you are interested in the full version, everything on the slides that I'm sharing today and more is available on our website at wichurches.org. We have a recording of the full webinar that we offered earlier this month. We have all of our slides. We have the full 15-page Returning to Church 2.0 guide with even more recommendations and references that you can use. So I will encourage you, if you feel like I am flying through the information, don't worry, there's somewhere you can go to get a fuller version of what I'm talking about. So highlights and then plenty of room for questions. We called our latest set of recommendations Holding Our Plans Loosely, because everything we know changes on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, sometimes. And so we just have to be ready to adapt. You know all of the things going on in your own context. I don't have to recap all of the stressors you're facing. What I need to remind you, though, is that the pandemic continues. At the beginning, we had said 12 to 18, maybe 24 months. That looks like that's going to hold. The science is evolving day by day, so some of the recommendations that came out early have shifted a little bit. The vaccine continues to develop, so does COVID. All of these have a bearing on the recommendations you're about to hear and the continuing recommendations we'll keep offering. Our priorities are always life and health of neighbor first. We go through a theological and ethical framework of this in our guidelines, but I also want to remind you, as you're thinking about what to do together, your role and the church's role as community leaders, and to trust in the resilience of the church. Bishop put this in his letter this week to you, and the church has endured for 2,000 years. This, in the context of 2,000 years, is a momentary crisis. It is going to change us as human beings, as a culture, as a church, no doubt. But the church is resilient. And whatever happens through this is not going to break the church. It's just going to change us. The best thing that you can do as leaders to hasten the day when we can return to ministry in physical place is to encourage vaccination and to maintain the expectation of individual and community protections against COVID until the majority of the population is vaccinated and background rates of COVID transmission go down substantially. Everyone we talk to says this, no matter if it's a national figure or a figure here in the state, this is what we're hearing. If there's anything you can do, reinforce these messages. And so I carry them back to you. A lot of folks say, okay, you keep telling us to watch these numbers and these numbers aren't going down. When can we get back to church? When are these numbers going to move? Why don't we just start opening up a little bit more now? And so working with our public health advisors, we've developed a two-step approach so we can actually start watching a number that's going to shift. The first thing we want people to watch right now is the vaccination rates. Vaccination rates are going to be going up. As more vaccine becomes available in the state, more people will get vaccinated, and the percentage of people who have gotten their full vaccination series will go up. As of today, 1.1% of Wisconsin's population was fully vaccinated against COVID. We need to watch for the vaccination rates to get to 50 to 75% of the population. When we get there, the background rates of COVID in the community are going to start declining because there's not going to be as many people for COVID to infect. At that point, we can watch COVID cases per 100,000 people and the rate of positive COVID tests. Both of those should start coming down. In combination with our advisors, we developed several rubrics built on an unsafe, safer, and safest standard. Safest is really that gold standard. If you need to move before we get there, there's this make it safer level. That's not ideal. That's still going to require a whole bunch of protections. But it's a place where you could still move. While vaccinations are less than 50%, we have more than 10 cases per 100,000 people, and positive tests are coming in at more than 10% of all the tests. It's unsafe to gather in person, according to everyone we've consulted. Our advisors say it would be safest to begin gathering when vaccinations are 70 to 85% of the population. We are seeing fewer than one new case per 100,000 people in the population, and positive tests are less than 5%. Now, to give you a little bit of context on those second two numbers, Wisconsin state average in the last 7 days had 34 new cases per 100,000 population. So we're nowhere close to moving on that. And we have just about 21% positive COVID tests right now. So again, nowhere close to that safer to gather. Our document that just came out gives sources for finding this data. We update it twice a month on our website. So it's right in the COVID section on the Returning to Church page, right up at the top in red. You can't miss it. And we'll be updating that at the beginning of next week for the beginning of February. We have some recommendations on how to return in our latest set of guidance. Remember that even once it's okay to go back, we're still going to need a long time of precautions. There will be people who won't be able to wear masks. There will be people who won't be able to be vaccinated. And so the rest of us need to make sure we use these protections to protect those who can't take advantage of them. We'll have to use a combination of the best mitigations we can agree upon as communities and hybrid ministry options, so we don't leave behind the people who we've been able to reach in this time when we have learned so much about digital ministry. Lots of details about how to do these things safer once we're back in place. The biggest piece of information that I can offer there is we'll need to have some phased plans. When we first go back, it's not like we're going 0 to 60 all at once. How do we start with baby steps and then stay there for 4 to 6 weeks? And then if there are no outbreaks, move forward. If there are no outbreaks after 4 to 6 weeks, move forward. And then what's the fallback plan if there's an outbreak? Do we have an attendance list so we can contact people and say, you may have been exposed, can you go get tested? Those of you who've experimented with ministry in physical place know some of these techniques. This is going to have to be something that everybody knows how to do. Reminder that vaccines aren't going to be a free pass. We're all going to have to keep up precautions. We don't get to throw away our masks just because we've been vaccinated. I have lots of answers I can give you if you have specific questions about singing and Ash Wednesday and Eucharist, things like that. We have a whole bunch of frequently asked questions, but I would advise you consult your attorney, your insurance agent, bishop and staff if you have really technical questions. Don't just try flying solo. Make sure you have good guidance. When you're looking at statistics, make sure you pick a certain source and stick with it. Don't go far around for your favorite site of the week. It'll save you a whole bunch of time and it'll give you good longitudinal data so you can compare how things have been over a period of time. All of our webinars are posted on our YouTube channel. All of our resources are posted on our Facebook page, including these slides and the ones that I breezed through. But I wanted to give you plenty of time for questions, have us have plenty of time for conversation. So, Bishop, how do you want to handle this? Do we want to triage what's in the chat? Do we want a free-for-all? On yours.
Thank you, Kerri. What I would encourage folks to do would be a couple of things. You can certainly enter a question or a comment into the chat. And Jennifer Arnold is also on this call, and she will kind of help me monitor that. You can also raise your hand, although keep in mind that because of the number of folks on this call, I cannot see you all at one time. Okay. And so certainly we can work to do that. So just feel free to speak up if I don't call on you, but also feel free to enter a question or a comment in the chat, or just use the raise hand feature if you'd like to do that, or just wave your hand and we'll call on you. So what questions or comments? Now, Kerri, just to get things started, if I could ask, the numbers that you cited with regards to cases, new cases per 100,000 and the test positivity rate, those are better than they used to be, right? But still not as good as they need to be, is that so? Just so communicate right. That.
They are improving, but not where they need to be yet. And there is a risk that they could decline once again with the new COVID variants that are projected to become prevalent in the United States.
Mm-hmm. There's a question I'm sure that many of us get and that you have responded to in other places as well, but the whataboutism, like what about our neighboring churches who have opened? And the question here is, we're hearing that other ELCA churches are open. When we are not, how can we best respond? What are some of the ways that you respond to those kinds of questions, Kerri?
Well, I start thinking about we control what we can control, right? In any system, we're only responsible for ourselves. We can influence others through our own actions, but we cannot control what our neighbors do. We can be a witness through our own choices. We can explain why we do what we do. We can also consider joint covenants or agreements with other churches in our area. So we develop a standard together. Those are all ways that we can work together to be visibly united and avoid some of these conflicts. What I would say is that some of these questions are based in fear. Will we lose congregants because church B is open and church A is not? And I would remind those of us who fall into that trap of fear that we are a people of faith. We are a people of love. And if the sheep wander and they are meant to come back, they will come back. It's okay. The church is resilient.
Thank you. Another comment with regard to the metrics in the guidelines seem to be so the bar seems to be so high, and found that to be a bit discouraging.
I hear that, which is part of why we put the vaccination rates first, because we haven't been seeing those numbers on cases per 100,000 and test rates come down at all. And people are getting weary of looking at them and taking really big chances, making significant risks for their community. The medical experts are saying we're going to start seeing those latter two numbers come down fairly quickly when we get to higher vaccination rates. Right now, the vaccination problem is just a problem of supply and distribution. The numbers are going to start going up quickly on vaccination. It's doubled in the past week. We're going to get there. And I think the real game changer is when in the next month or so, it sounds like a month to 2 months, there should be a vaccine on the market that is very effective. That's one shot, not a 2-shot series. Right now, we have a lot of people who have their first shot, but haven't completed the 2-shot series. And once those numbers come in, that's going to shift. So we'll get there. We need to be patient. We need to trust, and we need to realize that if we push this window, we're going to put more people at significant risk. If we are patient, we can use the best science available to us to protect the population, the people we love, all of our neighbors, against this virus.
Thank you. Another question has to do with the fact that the current vaccines that are available are not recommended for those under the age of 18. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about 50 or 70% of the population vaccinated, how is that factored in? And then do you also know if the next vaccine has been tested on children, or has that not yet happened? Two separate questions.
It is still the entire population of Wisconsin that we're calculating against. That being said, I know they are actively testing vaccines on children 4 and up now. So the next, not necessarily the next vaccine approved, because we don't know which one is going to be approved, but some of the next vaccines in the pipeline are being tested for authorization on children ages 4 through 18.
Do you know
So
if the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are also the ones that have been released, or they're now doing subsequent tests on those on the younger ages?
I'm not sure on whether those are the ones or not. I don't know.
Okay. So hopefully that will change within the coming months is what the bottom line is. Okay.
It will.
Another question has to do with even when we are able to regather, the precautions such as wearing masks and length of service are important. Do you have a recommendation in there about the length of service once we are able to regather with precautions?
Briefer. 30 minutes or less is ideal. When I'd say when we first start, aim for 20 to 30 minutes. All of the things that we were recommending last summer when people were trialing these gatherings would hold. So better is outdoors, shorter, further apart, fewer people. Riskier is indoors, more people, closer together, longer.
Right, and so there is some degree to which there is a range of comfort levels and risk levels, right? Even within our own congregations, there might be differences of opinion amongst folks. Whatever. So you have to kind of, those are some of the issues you have to work through, right?
Yep.
A question about clarifying which sites give the percentage of population that is vaccinated.
We use DHS for that. They are not giving a percentage of population, they are giving a raw number, and we divide that by 5.822 million people in Wisconsin. And so that comes from, actually, I will pull that for you. On this link, there is a chart that says cumulative total residents completing vaccination series.
So the numbers you're citing are those who have completed both shots, correct?
Correct.
Gotcha. So she just posted that into the chat, the link there that you can go to. So you can click on that and it should take you to the right place. Another question about a congregation where the members are predominantly older adults. What are your thoughts on looking at the vaccination rate amongst the congregational members instead of based on the general population?
You know, I think being aware of the vaccination rate among your members would be important when you consider whether you feel comfortable gathering. That being said, it doesn't change our ultimate benchmark for unsafe versus safer. So for instance, if you have a group of elders that have not been vaccinated yet, either, say they're vaccine hesitant or they have conditions that don't make it possible for them to get vaccinated. That would be an argument in my book for saying, you know what, we are not going to gather those folks right now. Even if the general population numbers were golden, for what it's worth.
Okay. Just taking a look here. The other question, of course, I think has to do with vaccine hesitancy amongst the population. Even, it's in some circles, I don't think it's exactly the same line that mask wearing is being drawn on, but there are those who do certainly have the vaccine hesitancy rates. What are your thoughts and comments about that?
I was speaking with a primary care provider the other day, and she said they are very pleased that they're getting many calls from people seeking the vaccine. It's a much higher rate of interest than they were anticipating, much better than the opposite problem of trying to convince people to get vaccinated. So we're in really good shape on that front. there's a lot of misinformation out there about vaccines that still needs to be debunked, though. One of the things we're doing to try to help that is we're going to have another webinar in early February with a gal named who goes by Friendly Neighborhood Epidemiologist. She's a professor at Baylor University. She's an actual epidemiologist, doctorate, published, all of these things. And she's also a clergy spouse. She's Baptist. And she has set herself up on the internet to be the friendly, accessible scientist who provides information people can understand. And she's going to do a webinar on vaccines for us. And so that would be for anyone, clergy, lay folk, who want to know more and understand the very minimal risk. This is a very low risk, very effective vaccine. So I would really encourage anyone who is eligible, who has a chance to be vaccinated, to take advantage of it and be thankful.
I would just note that if you're curious about the Friendly Neighbor Epidemiologist, she has a public Facebook page where she makes regular posts. So if you just go into Facebook and type in Friendly Neighbor Epidemiologist, hopeful that you can spell that, that you can follow her as well. And she's a great resource for us. So the other comment that I will just make has to do, I think, with the variability of vaccine distribution. There are guidelines that were differently interpreted amongst the states. Originally, that came out from the CDC when vaccines were first. Heard stories of one pharmacy that said, we've got 90 vaccines, but there's no one in class 1A to give it to. So all these class 1B people were just waiting to get vaccines. And that wasn't the intent, as I understand it, of the recommendations. But even now in our 7 counties of the greater Milwaukee Synod, there is variance in terms of, for example, with regards to spiritual care providers or clergy, right? Could you comment just a little bit on the variance that people are experiencing from county to county?
Part of that arises because Wisconsin's public health system is locally based, and it is intended to focus on the county. The difficulty with that is in a situation like we have, where we're a statewide organization, and like you have, where you span counties, it's hard to get people accurate information because you don't quite know where they are and what the individual county might be saying. What we do know on a statewide basis is that clergy who are spiritual care providers in a medical or emergency services setting are eligible to receive the vaccine now in phase 1A. So if you are a paid chaplain in a medical setting or an emergency services setting, you should see that facility to get your vaccine. If you are on call or weekend, paid or volunteer, you should be eligible to receive your vaccine. Check with the facility. If the facility cannot serve you, check with public health. You will probably need to bring an ID badge with you. County by county, we are seeing that some counties will let you be vaccinated if you visit healthcare facilities or provide end-of-life care as part of your ministry. That is on a county by county basis. Speaking with the Department of Health Services vaccination folks, they said the intent of their regulation was that folks who provide end-of-life care and might be in physical contact with someone at the end of their life and with human remains should be eligible to receive vaccines in 1A. That doesn't mean every county is getting that, they said. So that is what I know.
Right. So I'm aware of, at least in our 7-county area. And tell me if there's other counties. I know Waukesha County, there were a number of our colleagues in Waukesha County who were invited, called by one of the clinics and said, come on in, get your vaccine. Are there any other counties in which that is the case in our, the 7 counties of the Greater Milwaukee Synod?
Yes, I might.
Yeah, I have not heard of any. Let's see, Ozaki County as well has been invited to receive vaccines. Great. So my word is, even though we might have an ethical argument saying, well, do I really deserve it? Do I need it? There are other people, I don't want to cut a line. My own recommendation personally would be, if you're offered the vaccine, get it, right? Recognizing that some counties are going to do things differently, and you might think, oh, so-and-so is more deserving of me. Well, that's not the space that we need to enter. We need to enter the space of, when I can get the vaccine, I will get the vaccine, because getting the vaccine is the right thing to do. That would be my personal take on that. Certainly, it's not an edict of any kind. I don't issue those, but in strong encouragement that if a vaccine is made available to you, go ahead and get it. So there's a question in the chat. There's one more question I haven't got to, and then we'll certainly have other questions come up. Feel free to enter them in the chat, or I'll look around and see if anyone's waving their hand. Talking about, I know that group singing indoors has been identified as a high risk for transmission. Is there information about how risky it is outdoors to have either group liturgical responses or group singing for outdoor worship?
What we are hearing is that outdoors is safer. If you are distanced, group liturgical responses and singing by a cantor is relatively low risk activity. Indoors is not advisable at the rates that we have. One of the things that they're particularly concerned about is that the new variants are much more transmissible than the COVID strains that we have seen to date. As a matter of fact, if you're not already double masking, you should look at doing that. So wear a surgical mask plus a cloth mask is one of the strongest recommendations that we're now beginning to see.
Thank you. I don't, let's see. Have any Wisconsin-based health experts endorsed your recommendations? Talk a little bit about the sources that led you to these recommendations and that whole engagement with the Wisconsin health community.
Absolutely. We work regularly with folks from the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. One of our key advisors throughout the pandemic has also been retired, so the retired founder of Milwaukee's Office of Health Equity. I always have to get his credentials right. He's got 26 years of medical experience. He was on the faculty of the medical school, and he vets all of our medical stuff, which is really crucial. He's been a critical advisor, MD and a master's in public health. We also run our material by a nonprofit attorney. We also talk to religious leaders as well. And I mentioned DHS, yes. So that and informal conversations and insurance agents. So that's the other source. So those are the highlights. It's not an exhaustive list of conversations, but those are the key advisors that we go to.
Thank you. Who else has a comment or a question or kind of scrolling through the screen here. I've now figured out how to get you all on the screen because we've got 42 folks on the call now. Yeah, Kerri then also added an infectious disease lab researcher. So this is not Kerri Parker doing a Google search. This is extensive conversations and reviews with folks who spend their lives dealing with these kinds of issues and questions. So
yeah, all I do is synthesis and assembly, run it by my staff, and then turn it back over to these experts to say, does this accurately represent what you said to us?
yes, and so it's interesting. I look back on the last May, I think I had issued a set of kind of guidelines based on what I had read, and then about the same time, I think it was just after that, the Wisconsin Council of Churches released their guidelines. And so I didn't release new guidelines. I just point people to the Wisconsin Council of Churches. They're very similar in approach. And then when I look back on those, there's a couple things I chuckle. I encourage you, if you have newsletter articles or sermons from last March or April, go ahead and read them. I remember one of the comments I said, we don't know if this is going to last for weeks or months. It's what I said, right? Oh, how naive we all were back in those days, right? But I still look back at a lot of what I wrote and the Wisconsin Council of Churches wrote last May. It still holds. We have learned some things about the transmission. For example, what's called fomite transmission, which is touchable surfaces, and the need to remember, for a while we're all like sanitizing our groceries when we got back from the grocery store, et cetera. And that's been proven to be a much, much lower risk. Certainly high touch services, that light switches and doorknobs and things like that, yes, pay attention to. But in generally speaking, we've learned that that's not the area where we should be spending the bulk of our concern. It's really the air. The air transmission has been much more prevalent in terms of paying attention to that. So that's one of the things. It's not new information, but the priority has shifted, right?
Exactly. When it comes to going back into our buildings, we're telling people, don't be hyper about sanitizing. You don't have to blow your budget on sanitizing the entire building every time you have someone in there. Regular cleaning and focus on the high touch surfaces, the light switches, the doorknobs, all of those things like that. And those things are the most important things to spend your time on.
There's a question in the chat about the interface between these recommendations and protocols and our political systems, in which there is movement right now to relax or some of the mandates or guidelines that our governor has issued. How can the church collectively advocate these protocols to the Wisconsin legislators they seek to loosen, such as mask wearing standards, for example?
Today, actually. It's supposed to be, last I heard, it was supposed to be voted on today, although that may be changing. Every single, I think it was up to 22, most of the medical organizations in the state of Wisconsin have registered against this legislation, and the Wisconsin Council of Churches has joined them. You can call your legislator, you can email your legislator. They need to hear from you. Even if you believe they will agree with you, they need to hear from you, because then they can get on the floor for a speech and say, I have heard from X constituents who feel very strongly about this. It is, in advocacy, contacts matter, whether or not they agree with you. Every last contact matters. And even whatever happens in the legislature, to continue making those contacts and make those contacts with all of your elected officials in the state who have some interaction with policy. So keep an eye on what's happening at the Department of Health Services. If there's a public comment period on the vaccine and that's something that matters to you, you would be able to write in on that. If you believe the governor should take action as a citizen, you have the right to write to the governor. As a person of faith, your voice matters. This administration actually weighs voices of faith fairly heavily, and the lieutenant governor's office has been a wonderful contact for the Council of Churches and for other voices of faith. So the church can advocate, and our position is that is an appropriate role for the church because we believe in justice and what forms our common life.
Thank you. And as you have conversations in your own communities and congregations, sometimes it's important to reframe the conversation. I would suggest that if it's going down the road of choosing between freedom and fear, I think that's that's the wrong frame for this conversation, right? We've got to express our freedom, and if you don't, you're just acting out of fear. I think what we're concerned about is acting out of love, love for our neighbor. And justice is what love looks like in public, right? So when we love our neighbor in concrete ways by wearing a mask to protect them and minimize their risk of catching inadvertently the disease from me, when we institute that on a larger, more public scale, that does move into our political realm, but it is really rooted in our core commandment, which is at the heart of the gospel, which is we are called to love our neighbor as ourselves. And this means not just the Lutheran neighbors, right? Not just the neighbors who deserve to be loved, all our neighbors. And so just invite you to recognize and frame the conversation as best you can in those ways. The last thing I will lift up, and maybe Kerri, you'd want to comment a little bit on this as well. As we have learned and struggled with how to lead congregations in these really, really hard times, making really challenging decisions that very few of us have expertise in, right? Public health regulations and all these other kinds of things. I'm encouraging us to pay attention not just to what we decide, but how we decide, right? The muscles that you develop in terms of listening and weighing science versus the feelings of people so that people feel heard, but it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you listen to them, you have to agree with them, right? So you can listen to people and say, I understand that, and this is an important value that you have, right? However, this is another important value that we have as a community. And right now, we're choosing between two good values, right? The freedom to worship versus love for our neighbor. Both of those are important values. But right now, given the context that we find ourselves in, we're going to place priority on love for our neighbor and willingly give up a little bit of our own freedoms so that others may have an opportunity to live the life that God has intended them to live. So as leaders, just kind of think about the core values and how you might shape the conversation in a way, and don't necessarily accept the frame that is given to you by others. Do you have any thoughts on that, Kerri?
I think that's a really important reflection. In the 2.0 resource, at the very end, we have some links to depolarizing information. The reminder how valuable it is to count higher than 2. Anytime it's either or, there's going to be a winner and a loser. And that's not what we want to be about as a community. Our guidelines reflect on the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. How are we using our imagination to come up with different solutions to the dilemmas before us? How are we demonstrating the fruit of the Spirit when faced with something that seems to be an intractable problem? I think this is how we move away from the frame we're presented with into the frame that we are privileged to have as Jesus people. You know, this is a gift for us if we choose to live into it.
I would just then, I think we're going to be bringing this conversation to a close. If there's a question on the tip of your tongue, make sure you raise your hand or put it into the chat pretty quickly, because I'm going to wrap this up. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, in case you weren't present, at the end of this, we will invite those who are willing to go into small breakout rooms just to have some conversation back and forth. Either talk about what you heard today, or tell people how you're doing, or what your thoughts are on Sunday's football game. Whatever you want to do, and then we'll keep those open for about 15 minutes, and then you can depart from those rooms when you desire to do that. But just an offer that as you are having these conversations in your own congregational settings, whether it be your congregation council or your worship team or the staff, or however you frame these conversations, just feel free to invite any of us on Synod staff, either to talk with you before you go into a meeting, to pray with you before you go into a meeting, to pray with you after you come out of the meeting, right? And just to walk with you, or to be present in the meeting if that's at all helpful. I'm certainly willing to do that, because these can be very, the anxiety in the system can be ramped up, and that can lead to sometimes a pitting of an either or choice. And there's always, as Kerri said, count higher than 2, there's always more than one right answer to any question. So these are not meant to be like firm edicts and laws and black and white rules that you have to do. Certainly it's guidance and wisdom that we offer. But we want to walk with you and help you sort through how to make the best decision for your faith community, because God's still going to need a church on the other side of this. And I'm pretty confident that we're going to be a part of that movement in one way, shape, or form or another. So how we engage in these questions now will better set us up for how we engage in the challenges to come. Because once these challenges are done, I'm pretty sure there's going to be other ones that we're going to have to face, right? So let me just see if there's any other quick comments in the, yeah, so there is also the email address for Kerri is there in the chat. There's also the link to the Wisconsin Council of Churches resources, which are all available. Molly DeResa is reminding us to sign up for the Faith Partners Training Event and opioid and other substance abuse resources. And I see Roy Nelson either, he's raising his hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't have time to keyboard in and I was getting
That's
flustered.
fine. Go ahead.
So here's my thought is the biggest argument I'm getting now from my leadership, who've actually been pretty good sports, is, okay, we're all grown-ups. We can all choose what risks to accept in our lives. So, we should just yes, take the precautions, but, let in whoever wants to be there, because, if they want to be there, they're assuming the risk, right? My response to that to this point has been, yeah, I guess I'm the only one who doesn't get to choose then. But after February 3rd, I'll have both my vaccinations. So that argument is gone. Help me.
Kerri?
The risks you take as a community add to the cumulative risk for the wider community. And so it's not a matter of I, me, mine. It's the risk that you're adding up for everyone. If it were just you, that's one thing, but it's not.
I would also.
So it's not just the people who come into the room, it's where they go. Yeah, go ahead, Bishop.
No, I think it's there's just a slight connection that we might experience. For example, when back in the old days when we were in our buildings and there was a big snowstorm, and we debate, should we cancel church or hold church? And we said, well, if we hold church and say, well, you're grown-ups, if your roads are clear and your car is solid, come. Well, there's a number of our folks who are going to come no matter what. Their sense of duty and obligation is strong, right? That might be a generational thing, but it's also a personality thing. There are some people who are, if you hold church, they will feel shamed if they don't come. And so they're not deciding based on the risk factors, like I'm willing to take this risk. They're using different calculus. So you might make your decision based on, I can accept this risk in my own life. Other people may not be doing so. Is that paternalistic? Perhaps, but as leaders, I think we need to be mindful of providing the environment that allows people to exercise their best judgment. And sometimes we have to make a judgment for others. And that's a hard space. That's why there isn't a set of black and white, hard and fast rules. That's the art of leadership as you sort that through in your communities. But if you need to talk that through, myself or any of the other folks on staff would be more than happy to sit down and kind of talk through how to strategize, how to engage in that conversation or any other conversation that you're having on these issues. So
it may feel trite, but sometimes when I face these decisions that feel frustrating and challenging, I go back to my baptismal promises and my ordination promises, and I find them really clarifying.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I just want to say deep, deep gratitude to Reverend Kerri Parker for her work throughout this past year. It's been an amazing year, and we're grateful to have you on the journey with us. I'm going to close with a word of prayer, and then I'm going to pause the recording, and then if you want, I'll give a minute so that you can sign off if you want, and if you want to stick around for some chat rooms, we'll keep those open for a little bit, but let us pray. Holy God, we thank you once again for walking with us and giving us partners to walk with on this difficult journey that we are engaged in right now. So thank you for Kerri and for the work that she does, and the leaders and the scientists and all those folks who have helped shape these guidelines. We recognize that they are tools for us, and it's up to us to use them. So guide us, give us courage, give us wisdom, give us compassion, give us curiosity and strength to engage in the conversations that we need to engage in, trusting that you're going to guide and shape us every step of the way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.